Good morning. I am Thomas Jefferson. I wrote the American Declaration of Independence.
Today, Dave and Bill will tell you the story of an event that influenced me. It was an early note on an American melody.
History's strange, it's alien, and it won't give us what we would like to have.
Glad you're along here on WMMB as Renewal by Henderson brings you hour 3 of this Tuesday morning, the 16th of December 2025. Dave Bowman along with us for the day, and Tuesday's 8 o'clock hour belongs to Dave, and Dave Does History as our Liberty 250 series continues, marching toward the 4th of July and the 250th anniversary of this country. Dave, where are we at today, my friend?
This past week in 1640, there was an event in London that was remarkable for what had happened. Now, again, to us today, the 1640s, that was what, 500 years ago, 400 years ago? Who knows? I can't do math that quickly. It's not something that matters to us. Yet to these people, they were willing to risk literal imprisonment, deformation. They were willing to risk having their ears and limbs cut off, and possibly even death, to carry a piece of paper that said, we need change. It's time for some change. To us, we don't even know about it. But to the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence, this was barely 100 years before. They understood this event, and they understood what it mattered and why it mattered. In the early mid-1990s, I guess, when I was still a pastor, I had a church in Georgia, and the primary congregation of which was young college students, people who were 18, 19 years old. And it was right around the time, Bill, that the TV show, That 70s Show, became a hit. And we were sitting around the room watching this show one night. And look, I'm not commenting on the show, whether you liked it or not. I thought the first season was brilliant.
It was funny as could be. It was nostalgic, as we talked earlier. It
was obvious to me that the people who wrote, particularly that first season, had been there. They understood the 70s. As I did. I was a teenager in the 70s. It wasn't just nostalgia to me, Bill. It was like going home in a lot of ways. I mean, it really was. But what I quickly realized was that these young kids, most of whom were born in the early 80s, just didn't get it. To them, I mean, they understood that it was supposed to be funny, and maybe they got the jokes and the laugh track laughs, so they knew they were supposed to, but they didn't really understand why something was funny.
Okay.
Trying to explain to them the context of it was darn near impossible because they had no real frame of reference. To them, it was just the 1970s. That's just old history, right? It's like me listening to my grandfather talk about the Depression. I get it. I know it happened, but I didn't experience it. I didn't really grasp it.
I don't have any concept of what it was like. And even though I talked with my mom about it, not frequently, but regularly, and she grew up totally different than we did. And you don't grasp it because you didn't have anything to relate it to.
And when you don't have that frame of reference, that understanding of things, going forward makes it difficult then to really communicate to people, okay, why then does this happen? Because if you don't really have that frame of reference, if you don't have that understanding, if you didn't have that experience, you really don't have anything to base it on, do you?
And we'll see where it takes us in just 60 seconds here with Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. So, Dave, what I'm hearing you tell me is that the founding fathers were plugged into their history over the previous century or two, unlike we have become. And while we may know about it, we didn't dive in and understand it the way they did.
we didn't understand it. We don't understand it. If you tried to explain to somebody the culture of the United States 100 years ago in 1925, do you think we would really understand that? I mean, just the language shifts alone would be bizarre to us. I mean, today people would be offended by the language. Oh, they're slandering me kind of approach to it.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't. Culturally, we wouldn't grasp it. But the framers...
In the heart of the Industrial Revolution at that point.
A little bit beyond that, but in that post-World War I era, the Roaring '20s, it was a different, Prohibition was a thing. I mean, can you imagine trying to explain Prohibition to people today?
Once you sobered them up, maybe.
So the founders looked at this event, this 1640 event, December 1640, and they took a lesson from this little event because little event, he said, erroneously, because this was actually a major event. And like a creek that's flowing underneath a snowbank that maybe you don't see when you're walking on your brother-in-law's property, it's still there, and it's still affecting things, even though you can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
There's this idea that I call Rule 3, and you can take out your Dave Bowman's Book of Blessings and write this one down in there. And that is that when systems fail, when people begin to lose faith in the systems that are supposed to be working for them, that's one of the catalysts for change. It's one of the things that causes people to take action or to seek out new leaders. And this action in December of 1640 is caused because King Charles I, who is, by all definitions that the framers and the founders of this country would have had, a tyrant, is literally suffocating the English people. From 1629 to 1640, he did not allow Parliament, the people's representatives, to sit at all, which means there's no national forum for grievances. Grievances, right? That's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't air them to the government. You couldn't get them corrected. You couldn't even get them acknowledged. Imagine that, having a complaint about your government, and there's nobody to even listen to you. Governments literally became something that happened to people, not for people. It wasn't something that they were allowed to participate in. Now, at first, people kind of accepted this. Why? Because of Rule 3. Systems got out of whack. They needed a strong leader. They got that in Charles I. He prioritized stability. And most people assumed that this period of what was known as personal rule would be temporary. But, it turned out not to be. Charles I kind of liked ruling by himself and not having to answer Parliament. The problem was that as he began doing this stuff, he started demanding money without consent. Ship money, which is a levy meant to deal with emergencies, became routine every day. Well, we got to have this emergency tax for this. We got to have this emergency tax for that. We have to have this emergency. Does this sound familiar to anybody? It became routine and universal. And if you refused, you were punished. Courts that once existed to restrain power became repurposed to enforce that power. The Star Chamber, you've heard that phrase, I hope, and the High Commission courts operated without juries and without much interest in basic fairness. For ordinary people, this became a matter of deep concern. Justice that cannot be appealed is not justice. It's really kind of a warning. And at the center of all this system stood a guy by the name of Archbishop William Laud. He believed that England had become spiritually lax and dangerously divided, and his solution was to enforce uniformity, theologically, from the top down. He changed all the worship of the people, insisted on ceremony, ritual, obedience. Communion tables were moved and fenced out. Sermons that emphasized Calvinistic doctrines, which many of the Protestant people liked, were banned. The Book of Common Prayers was imposed without deviation, practices that many English Protestants clearly associated with Catholicism. And they were creeping back into everyday parish life, not through persuasion, not through, hey, this is the right way, but through command. Disagreement was not tolerated. Critics were not debated. They were instead crushed. And you had men like John Prang, Henry Burton, John Bastwick, who spoke out against it, and they were swiftly and publicly punished, fined, imprisoned, branded, mutilated, ears cut off in a deliberate display of authority. The intention was to deter dissent. The result, however, as so often happens, was the opposite. Ordinary people saw these punishments and concluded that something fundamental was broken. Rule 3 began to kick in. When a church must mutilate its critics to maintain obedience, it no longer feels like it's a spiritual institution. It becomes, in fact, the state. There's no relief valve here. Parliament is absent. The king's not listening. Compromise vanishes. The clergy are just ignoring everything. And Charles I attempts to inflict this same religious program on Scotland, which, by the way, failed. And when that failed, his weakness became apparent to everyone. And when Parliament finally returned in late 1640, the nation could no longer trust quiet correction. Action had to be taken.
Sounds like we're leading up to a game of Smear the Archbishop. We'll see as we continue with Dave Does History in moments.
Our weekly dive into history. Dave Bowman joins us on Bill Mick Live.
Renewal by Anderson, our sponsor. You can also follow us on Instagram at WMMB Radio. So that's available for you. WMMB Facebook page, where most of our stuff's going on today. We couldn't get the show page up and running because of a content tool problem. Hopefully that'll be resolved by the time we hit tomorrow's Wide Open Wednesday. Dave, as we talk about understanding history and how the grievances that were laid out in the Declaration of Independence are put together, you've taken us all the way back to 1640. Let's pick it up and see where we're going here.
Well, again, this is because we're trying to explain the context of our own grievances and why we do it this way. Nothing happens in a vacuum. When Thomas Jefferson sits down in July of 1776, June of 1776, he's not inventing the wheel. He's not even reinventing the wheel. He is being an Englishman who knows English history, and he is reminding all the people who are going to read this of English history. In December of 1640, when Parliament finally resets again, and this petition shows up, the people, Rule 3 is very clear, the systems are failing, people are upset. They bring this petition to Parliament because that's what they do. They present their grievances. Now, this list of grievances, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you need to understand what this is. Number one, it demands the complete abolition of the episcopal government in England. Not reform, absolute abolition. Get rid of it. Calls for the removal of archbishops, bishops, deans, chapters, prebends, canons, and all the offices that flow from those. The language is very deliberate. These offices are described as a singular system, and the whole structure has to go. The petition argues that the episcopacy, that is the church government, is dangerous both to the church and to the Commonwealth. It's not a theological disagreement, Bill. The petitioners insist that the bishops have become a political threat because they accuse the episcopal hierarchy of claiming authority directly from Christ, a claim that places the bishops above the king and beyond parliamentary control. This argument matters. It reframes the bishops not as churchmen, but as rivals to the civil authority. The petition argues about some specific religious grievances. It condemns the suppression of Calvinistic doctrine, it complains about the forced use of the Book of Common Prayer without any deviation at all. I mean, even today in the synagogue, we'll deviate from the Siddur. I'm pretty sure most churches will deviate from things a little bit here and there to fit their local needs. It objects to the reintroduction of ceremonies and practices that the petitioners are very sure are Roman Catholic. They're not abstract concerns. They're what ordinary people experience every week. They also denounce the machinery of enforcement, the High Commission and the other ecclesiastical courts that punish dissent without any jury or appeal. The petitioners argue that these courts intimidate clergy, silence conscience, and protect corrupt officials. In the petition, bishops are using the law not to guide souls, but to crush any opposition. And they link the church to the national security of England. The petitioners accuse the bishop of having caused the recent wars with Scotland by trying to impose their episcopal worship on the Presbyterian nation of Scotland. And they argue that as long as bishops remain in power, England risks further war. And this is something that's going on. Charles I is going to all these wars, and he's being encouraged by the church to do that. And it's the
same. Do you feel threatened by the church at that point?
Charles I, no, he does not feel threatened by the church. He feels very much comfortable with the church.
Okay.
But this Root and Branch Petition, that's what it's known as, the Root and Branch Petition, argues that all of this stuff needs to not just be reformed, it needs to be ripped out. And it calls for all of this to happen, which, of course, is not going to set well with the bishops and the ecclesiology.
We pick it up in just a moment as Renewal by Anderson is this hour's sponsor of our show. All of December, their 31-day sale. If your holiday wish list includes upgrading your home a little bit, let's do it with Renewal by Anderson and their replacement windows and patio doors. Buy one, get one, 40% off right now with no money down, no payments, and no interest for 18 months. And free TrueScene screen upgrades for the first 50 customers taking advantage here. Terms and conditions apply. See those and schedule your free in-home consultation at bestwindowsflorida.com. Or call pound 250, say Best Windows. That'll connect you to Renewal by Anderson, and you get a one-time option for an auto-dial text from iHeartMedia. These Acclaim Impact windows and doors built for our coastal climate and designed to save you money on energy bills. They will reduce noise in your home. The insulation taking care of both of those very nicely, and they're unmatched in strength. Hurricane rated to your zip code, bringing you peace of mind with Acclaim Impact windows and doors from Renewal by Anderson. BestWindowsFlorida.com or call them at pound 250. License number is CGC 1527613. So the clergy is gone wild here, Dave, and the people aren't having it. How's it progressed?
They've been allowed to do this. The king has encouraged it. And, of course, when systems start to break down, that's when change becomes imperative. Now, it's important to understand what's not in the Root and Branch Petition. There's no call to overthrow the monarchy. There's no call for violence, no rejection of the law itself. The petition speaks from inside the English constitutional tradition. It appeals to the idea that, hey, we're Englishmen and we have certain rights, even as it pushes that tradition almost to the breaking point. The petition assumes that Parliament can still function, which isn't clear at this point. It assumes that reform is still possible. It's not going to last long, that assumption, but it's still there right now. So what it actually is this: a systematic case that the church hierarchy has fused spiritual authority with political coercion, corrupted both, and that it has to be dismantled for the nation to survive. It's not emotional. It's not poetic. It's a methodical, it's accusatory, and it's confident. And that is why it terrifies the snot out of people. It's not the voice of a mob. It's the voice of citizens who believe that they are already too late to fix the problem gently.
But they're working within the system to do it.
But they're laying out their grievances. And they present these to Parliament this week in December of 1640. Parliament, of course, which is sitting for the first time in many years, doesn't know what to do. They think that this is just an argument about how to repair the church and restrain the king without breaking the kingdom. Many men in Parliament honestly believe that they could solve this if they could solve this religious question, the constitutional questions would become manageable. What they don't see, or what they don't want to see, was that the debates are not about repairing anything. They're revealing how little shared ground there is left. And this root and branch position really isn't saying, yeah, we want to go back, we want to restore everything. It's no, this has got to be changed. This is one of the quiet mechanisms of a civil war. People imagine war begins when someone chooses violence. Sometimes it does. Oftentimes it begins earlier when a society discovers that it no longer agrees on what is legitimate, which is exactly what we've been going through here in 1763 to 1775 in America. This idea that we are concerned that the way that England and the king, once again, is ruling us is no longer legitimate. Parliament in 1640 struggled. Institutions began to crumble. The king distrusted the Commons. The Commons distrusted the king. The House of Lords was resisting reform. The church hierarchy was digging its heels in and saying, we're not changing anything. And it's this moment that we realize that institutions have stopped working. And that's when people turn to personalities. And on the horizon in 1640 is a personality known as Oliver Cromwell. In 1776, it's a little bit different, but we start to see a different personality that's going to run things.
And we pick it up in moments on WMMB.
Call Bill now, 321-768-1240.
Renewal by Anderson, our sponsor. It is Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. And time to take the lessons of England's past and apply them to America's future. Dave, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
So this Root and Branch Petition, it belongs to the 1600s, to 17th century England. It's tempting to just file it away as some exotic artifact, something written by anxious Londoners who dressed weird and argued too much about bishops, and doesn't seem to matter too much to us. But that's a mistake. If you read it closely and you listen to it closely, it sounds a lot like an early note in a melody that Americans are going to sing much louder. Not the same lyrics, not the same stage, but the same instinct, the same ideas, the same understanding culturally. When people believe that their rulers will not hear them through normal channels, they put their grievances in writing and they demand structural change. That habit didn't start with Thomas Jefferson in 1776. It had older roots, and England was one of the places where that idea grew. When we think about what the petition actually was, it was not a riot. It was not an assassination plot. It was very public, and it was an organized effort to gather thousands of names, present them to the national legislature, and insist that the problem was not a bad policy, but a bad system. The petitioners were not asking Parliament to restrain one bishop or punish one corrupt official. They demanded the abolition of the entire episcopal hierarchy, roots and branches, because they believed that the hierarchy itself had become an engine of oppression. And that's kind of the foreshadowing for us. We didn't invent the idea of cataloging our grievances, gathering public support, and demanding that structural reform. We inherited that from a long English tradition of petitioning, remonstrating, and asserting that rulers have to be accountable. The language changes over time. The theology, of course, shifted. The political context evolved. But the core methodology, the core understanding, the core ideas remained. When the system jams up, people write. The Root and Branch Petition, of course, is not the Declaration of Independence, but it behaves like one in an important way. It announces to the world that the existing structure has lost its credibilities in the eyes of the people presenting that document. Think about 1776. What does the Declaration of Independence do? It announces that the king, the British structure, has lost credibility in our eyes. It says, in effect, that the current arrangement cannot be trusted to correct itself. Jefferson writes that. Look, we've petitioned, we've tried, we've discussed, and nothing is getting done. The petitioners may not have used modern language the way we would have, like legitimacy, but that's what they were challenging. They were saying that the bishops had not just become wrong, but dangerous, and that leaving them in place would ruin both the church and the Commonwealth. It's kind of something we say about the king. If he stays in charge, it's going to destroy everything. It's going to destroy the whole idea. This idea it's fascinating to me. It really is. It's foreshadowing in many ways, the Root and Branch Petition. We didn't invent this idea, but it carried on for us. If we compare that to the Declaration of Independence, we don't argue that King George has made just a few mistakes that can be fixed with better advisors. It says that the structure is beyond repair. It lists grievances not as bargaining chips, but as evidence that the political bond has been broken, that the colonies are no longer part of this. We're not asking for a better deal. We're demanding, root and branch, that the whole thing be ripped out and that we have a separation. Now, the Root and Branch Petition, of course, didn't go that far, because it still thought and imagined this idea of reforming the kingdom from inside. But the tone contains the same kind of turning point. It's written from the far side of disappointment. It is what people write when they no longer believe that gentle correction will work. The purpose is different, but the posture is very familiar and similar to the founders of this country. Both documents take a crisis, and they frame it as an indictment of a system. The petition is also steeped in very religious language because 17th century England could not separate faith from political order. It speaks of God's word, doctrinal oppression, spiritual danger. The Declaration is framed in the language of natural rights because 18th century America is shaped by Enlightenment political philosophy and our colonial experience. Both documents claim the high moral ground, that they are not only legal complaints, they are moral accusations. They tell the person who's reading them, whether that reader is Parliament or the King or the entire world, that something sacred has been violated. And both documents emerge from crises of legitimacy. In England, this idea is becoming... It's a tangled crisis. Charles I governs without Parliament for 11 years. He raises money without consent. He uses courts to bypass juries. Elevates Archbishop Laud, forces wars to happen that fail, and he wants people to pay for it. In America, the crisis is somewhat different, but it's still recognizable. Colonial assemblies exist, but they cannot resolve the dispute with Parliament. Petitions and protests accumulate. And the imperial system responds how? With force and with contempt, exactly as it had done during the time of self-rule. The Crown and Parliament insist on authority without any meaningful representation, and by 1776, many of our colonialists conclude that the imperial structure cannot be trusted to fix itself. The Declaration names this problem plainly, and it makes the confrontation unavoidable. It's the shared mechanism. Both documents raise the stakes until conflict becomes difficult to avoid, not because the writers crave violence, but because the logic of the document leaves no room for reconciliation. And that's what happens. When institutions stop working, people turn to personalities. In 1640, they turned to Oliver Cromwell, and they got rid of the king. They chopped his head off. In England, that root and branch crisis pushed people towards personalities rapidly. In America, the same gravitational pull appears, where the imperial system had failed to respond, colonialists elevated leaders who seemed to understand the moment. Sam Adams becomes a force. Patrick Henry becomes the voice. Thomas Paine becomes the spark. And then, in the most consequential example of all, George Washington becomes the personality capable of holding together a fragile coalition without turning into a tyrant. That last point we should linger on just a moment because it's not sentimental, it's rare. When institutions fail, the hunger for what I call a mule increases, the mule being this personality that's going to, a Caesar, Bill, is going to increase. People want a single figure who will resolve uncertainty. And because of that, they will accept methods that they would have rejected in calmer times, because fear and exhaustion make them impatient with procedure. England's crisis produced leaders who were brilliant, stubborn, and in some cases ruthless. But it can produce those conditions where the mule, where the leader, Cromwell, could appear. Our crisis also produced those same kind of conditions, but we didn't have a person who was seeking personal authority. Washington's personality was enormous, but he reinforced institutional authority, and in fact would go on to lead the Constitutional Convention later on. It's not a moral lesson wrapped with a bow. It's a historical observation. It's fragile. Depends on character, circumstances, and a public that still wants our institutions survived. So if you're watching this episode, you can say it plainly. The Root and Branch Petition, it's not an American document, but it foreshadows an American habit. It shows how grievances become written, public, and structural. It shows how legitimacy collapses when institutions fail to correct themselves and their abuses. And it shows how confrontation and debate can turn into war, even when nobody wants it. And it should make us cautious. The struggle to balance institutions and personalities is a very old story. It began long before 1776. It ran through Westminster long before it ran through Philadelphia. It's present whenever people lose trust in those systems and begin searching for a singular person to carry their hopes. Sometimes you get a Washington. Sometimes it's something darker, a Cromwell. Either way, the pattern is not new. History demands that we understand this. It demands that we recognize it, and demands that, like that 70s show, we understand the context.
And we pick it up in 1 minute on WMMB. I stopped by Mako and Suntree yesterday, talked to Joe for a little bit. That crew handled the work on my truck on a couple of occasions, and good to sit down and talk to Joe. Good to see that you folks are responding to what I'm telling you about Mako. You're experiencing what I did. Good folks doing great work, making your vehicle look the way you want it to look, and thank you for that response. They've got 3 locations for you here in Brevard, off of 192 in Melbourne, Suntree Boulevard, where I was talking to Joe yesterday, and in Cocoa on Clear Lake Road. Whether you've got minor body work to be done or maybe you just want a paint job to make that car look the way you want it to look, Mako is who you can trust. I did on more than one occasion for minor work and for the big jobs. It's Mako. 3 locations in Brevard. We appreciate their sponsorship here, and I appreciate your response to them and what we've told you about them here. Wrapping up, Dave Does History on a Tuesday morning. Dave, in the 1640 petition, did those petitioners believe, at least initially, that the petition process was going to work, that they were going to see change as a result of that? Or was it kind of declaration-like that, hey, look, we're telling you this is what we're seeing, and we're going to have problems if you don't fix it?
In theory, they were hoping for change. They were hoping that Parliament would react and Parliament would take these actions, but they also kind of knew that Charles I, being the tyrant that he was going to be resistive. And for us, we don't really understand the religious element per se in this. We don't, the whole Catholic versus Protestant thing to us today, not quite as intense as it was back then. So there was that element to it. But to me, when I read it, I see a group of people that are willing to put their lives, legacies, their lives and honor, as Jefferson will write, on the line. And they do so because they believe that the system is broken. This is Rule 3. When people lose faith in systems, They look for that mule. They look for that leader who's going to fix everything, whether that's within the system that exists now. Are they going to accept things that they wouldn't accept before? Sure, because they want the chaos to stop.
Well, and the other point that I noted that I thought was very important in what you said this morning is that both of these folks, the folks in 1640 and the folks in 1776, laid forward not just their grievances, but a moral foundation for them that was being violated that shouldn't have been violated from the beginning.
Yep, that's what it comes down to. Is you are violating our rights, and we're not going to have that.
Well, the phones are starting to ring, but we're out of time in the hour, so we will leave that for tomorrow's Wide Open Wednesday. Renewal by Anderson brought you this hour. Dave Bowman, good to have you back. We are back again next week, and then we'll be off the following week, as I recall.
We'll see you then.
All right, look forward to it. Thank you much, Dave. Thank you. I'll see you in the morning at 6. It's Wide Open Wednesday. Be ready, folks.
Check out more stories from history at davedoeshistory.org.